Okay, here at least it's 3 o'clock, so I am going to start the session just now. My name is George Beckett. I'm part of the ARCHER2 CSE team based here in EPCC in Edinburgh, and today I'm going to spend probably about 30-40 minutes talking to you about our plans for providing support on the ARCHER2 service. The talk today was written by not only me, but my colleagues in the CSE team, Joe Beachbrand, Chris Johnson, Ju, Anne, and Lorna Smith. So I should give them credit too. Before I start, I should say this session is being recorded so that we can then publish it on our YouTube channel. For people who can't make the session, they can listen to it offline a little bit later. There will be a chance for questions. You can either submit questions via the chat, and then I will try and keep an eye on that and answer those at the appropriate time. Or you're also welcome to turn your audio on and ask questions directly. But just remember, we are being recorded. That may or may not influence your decision as to whether you want to speak on the call or not. So I'll start by giving you a short copyright message. So this talk will be published online, and almost all of the material we have for ARCHER2 we aim to share as widely as possible. You're welcome to reuse these slides if they're useful to you and to adapt them, but we ask you to bear in mind the license and to pay attention to that when you reuse the slides. So as I said, today I'm going to talk a little bit about the support mechanisms we have in place on ARCHER2 and how they will hopefully help you and the community to get the most out of the service as it ramps up over the next few months. I'll start by talking a little bit about the motivation, the background behind the support we offer. And then I'll spend most of the time talking about what we're calling a spectrum of support. If you're an ARCHER user or you've used the ARCHER service in the past, you'll be familiar with a lot of what I'm going to talk about, but there's also some new things and some changes which it's worthwhile to be aware of, which we believe will hopefully mean that we are better able to support the community and provide more flexible routes through. I'll talk about our feedback and our approach to improvement and wrap up with some conclusions, effectively a summary of what I've said, and then we can go to questions if people have got things they want to follow up on or ask. So EPCC aims to provide a wide range of support for ARCHER2 for the user community, aimed at delivering world-leading scientific research. ARCHER2, if you've been to the previous seminar by my colleague Andy Turner, you'll know it's going to be a very powerful system which has opportunities and capabilities to run some of the largest simulations possible at the moment in the research community. We're aiming to support that, but we're also aiming to widen the scope of access to ARCHER2, and so we're looking to provide routes for new research communities to take up HPC as part of their research portfolio and to learn about HPC and get some of the benefits from a world-class supercomputer. And we're also aiming to be as flexible, as open, and as responsive as we possibly can to users' needs. And to do that, we need to know what those users' needs are and really work very much with the community around those needs. We've built a support service which is based around a number of fundamental philosophies. We aim to provide quality service. I guess that goes without saying, but many of you will know already that EPCC has run HPC services for a number of years now. We have a large pool of skilled and experienced staff, and they will be working on the ARCHER2 service and supporting the community to use the ARCHER2 service. Our main route of access for support is the service desk. Previously, I think it was called the help desk under ARCHER. We're following the ITIL guidelines, and a number of our mechanisms and processes are inspired by ITIL. And in particular, we're now calling it the service desk. Our service desk hours are 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. On Monday to Friday, unless it's a public holiday. So that pretty well means around the year, you can contact us directly between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. And the staff that work on the help desk are technically skilled, knowledgeable individuals who are existing users of the service, do HPC research and HPC scientific computing in their own right, and so are well placed to help people to get more out of the computer system. We aim to provide a coherent service. It's a collaboration of partners, ARCHER2. So EPCC actually runs the accommodation, the service provision, and the computational science and engineering elements of the service. But we also work with our sponsor, which is UKRI, and with our hardware provider, which is Cray, as you almost certainly already know. And as I've said before, the aim is to be responsive to an evolving user requirement. The service is due to run through to the middle of the decade, and during that time, it's likely that the way people use HPC will change and the type of applications will change. We want to be as approachable and as inclusive as possible. We welcome feedback and we welcome engagement with the community. It helps us to understand that the service is useful and understand what the service is used for. And we aim to be flexible and adaptable. Different people want to engage with us in different ways, and we try and support that. Different people have different requirements, different levels of experience and expertise, and we want to make sure that everybody is equally able to get access to and get results from the system. And we are looking for feedback throughout the service, and we have a continuing process of service improvement. So as the service evolves over its life, we hope that things will improve. Sometimes we'll try things that don't work so well, and some things will work very well, and we'll push to keep going with the things that work better. As I mentioned briefly, our service is based around the ITIL framework, and that means we've organized the support mechanism around a set of what are called functions in ITIL. Some of those functions will be very visible to the end user, such as the service desk. In-depth support is where we work with users on problems or requests or queries that can't be answered in a straightforward, immediate way, and maybe take some time and some investigation. The embedded CSE service, many of you will be familiar with already, and I'm going to talk more about how that will be in ARCHER2. And feedback and improvement is something that hopefully you'll see frequently throughout your use of the service. But the functions are supported by a number of, if you like, back office functions that are maybe less apparent to the end users, but equally important. We have a technical operations function, which manages our website, provides documentation, user guides, and the like. A systems operation function that maintains the underlying hardware, software, and the components of the service. We have a reasonably comprehensive training program, which many of you will have participated in the past and will continue into ARCHER2. Outreach and establishing impact is also an important part of the ARCHER2 service. You may have seen us at various events, used some of our outreach material already, and if you've worked with us through things like embedded CSE, you'll know that understanding the impact and the benefits of the work we do is very important. We also have a reporting function, not very exciting for end users, but important for us to demonstrate that we're committed to the service and we're doing a good job of running the service. And also quality and data security are very important. Although this is a research facility, we recognize that people are putting significant data on there, important and valuable data on there, and using the service in a secure and reliable manner is very important. As I've hinted to a couple of times, the support mechanism within ARCHER2 we're referring to as the spectrum of support. And by that, we're trying to convey the fact that we want to support the whole range of different engagements we expect. So this can be everything from a short query, a simple to answer question potentially, or at least a quick to resolve query, through to an extended collaborative research project up to a year in length, typically, of software development activities. Many of these mechanisms are in place already and have been for the Archer service for a number of years, but there are some new services that we're offering, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in subsequent slides. So we are running what's called a callback service, and I'll talk a little bit about that shortly, which is another way to engage with the CSE team. We're also going to roll out a scheme of technical mini projects, code health checks, lightweight eCSE projects, and virtual consultancies. And I'm going to go through each of those in the next few slides. But I'm going to share with you a little picture that actually we have. It's an internal picture, but I think it's worthwhile sharing with you just now, that shows how all these different elements fit into the spectrum of support. So over on the left, we have relatively lightweight, relatively transient interactions. And as you move to the right along the arrow, you see more and more long-term collaborative, potentially complex interactions. And the aim is that through CSE and through SB, we'll be supporting all of these interactions. And the aim is there's no gaps. A number of these support mechanisms existed for Archer, but there are more now. And in particular, we've filled in that middle zone where perhaps there was a less obvious transition from an in-depth query through to something like an embedded CSE project. If I start with the service desk, many of you will be familiar with the service desk. This is the first point of call for people to interact with ARCHER2 and has been for our other services in the past. All user queries, and that can be questions, comments, problems, concerns, are all handled through our service desk. As I mentioned previously, it's staffed, or it will be for ARCHER2 staffed from 8 AM to 6 PM. And we try and provide a range of different ways to access the service desk. A very popular way is to email. You can also phone into the service to raise a ticket. And if you use the SAFE regularly, you'll have a SAFE account anyway as part of your user access. There is a web form on the SAFE which you can fill in to submit a query. In ARCHER2, queries are classified slightly differently to in Archer. This is more of an internal thing, not something necessarily you need to worry about, but we will classify queries as level 1, level 2, or level 3. And the classification will determine how they are escalated and how we try to deal with them. The key thing is that when you submit your query, we will aim to provide an initial response in which we'll say how long we think it'll take to answer that query. If you're registering for a training course, it may be that the initial response comes back very quickly and effectively says, thank you, you're registered for the course, here are the details. If you're submitting a very complex request for help, then it could be that it will take longer, and we will give you an estimate of how long we think it will take, although obviously there'll be some uncertainty there depending on how the query develops and how we end up solving your problem. And the help desk is a primary route through which we can gather feedback on how we're faring with regard to users. And so users will be invited to provide feedback through the query system as the query evolves. I've got another internal picture here, which is maybe a little bit too complicated, but I'll share it with you anyway. What you should take away from this is the ARCHER2 service involves a number of different partners. We've got CRAE, we've got the CSE team who look after the science and engineering side, and we've got the service provision team who look after the underpinning services. And in all cases, you interact with the same service desk, and we worry about making sure that your query gets to the right person, gets to the right team, and is handled as effectively as possible. If you've used our TS2 service, Cirrus, then you probably will be pleased to hear and interested to hear that the same service desk is supporting Cirrus 2. So there are a small number of instances where you may have an account on Cirrus and on ARCHER2, and you may have a query related to both of them. We can deal with it in the same way. But it's all tied together behind the scenes. For you, it is just a single unified service desk, and we'll worry about making sure that your query is answered appropriately. One of the things I mentioned that was new is the callback service, and the idea here is if you would like to talk about your query potentially as you're raising it, then you can request a callback. You do this through the help desk, and we will aim to call you back. Typically, that same afternoon or that same morning, possibly the following day if you request a call back towards the end of the day, but it will typically be as quickly as possible. And the idea is that will give us a chance to talk through you what the query is that you want to raise, potentially help you to write that ticket so that there's less toing and froing, less iteration initially to make sure we've got the information we need to properly solve the problem. It's also an alternative way. Some people prefer to talk to a person rather than to fill in a form. And again, if that's what you want to do, then we can support that. And so once the ARCHER2 service is up and running, then this callback facility will be available and gives you the chance to talk to one of our CSE team. And as I say, we aim to give you a call back within 1 to 2 hours of you raising the request. Depending on the level of demand, it could be quicker. In occasional cases, it might be a little bit longer. If I then look at the next phase of the spectrum support, which is our in-depth support activities, there are a number of things worth highlighting. First of all, we're rolling out a new scheme called Technical Mini Projects. And the idea is that users will be able to apply for technical effort from the CSE team up to a month of that effort. And it's intended to enable short technical projects, which we hope will typically be collaborative. So you as the user raising the mini project will work with a CSE team member to solve a problem. And it's intended to facilitate your use of ARCHER2. Some examples of things that you might consider as candidates for technical mini projects. So profiling a piece of software to identify how well it performs, maybe to look for some optimization recommendations to make the best use of ARCHER2. We're also potentially offering software sustainability assessments. So in conjunction with the Software Sustainability Institute, we're looking to provide guidance and support for people who are developing their own software for science, but want to make sure that that software is as available and as resilient as possible and doesn't necessarily rely on their sole attention. It can be made into more of a community investment, or it can be widened in scope to a wider community. If you have complex workflows involving ARCHER2, we can help you to develop those workflows to make sure that they're as automated, as robust as possible. And if you have significant data challenges, we can help you to develop a data management plan or even a data transfer approach to make sure that you can get the data as effectively and as safely as possible into ARCHER2 or from ARCHER2 to other facilities as is needed by your workflow. The aim is that we'll have a relatively lightweight application process. It will be sort of responsive mode. We propose that we'll review these on a monthly basis. So there'll be a simple form to fill in and it'll be available soon. And we will aim to get back to you on the timescale of around about a month with a decision on that. Another new service we're offering is called an application health check. This you can think of if you own a car and live in the UK, you'll be familiar with the MOT. And this is effectively what this is. It's an MOT style assessment of a particular software application, focused in particular on how suitable it is for ARCHER2. The aim is that we can run through a checklist of key elements of the software and then provide guidance on how best to configure the software or the workflow in which it sits so that it will work effectively on ARCHER2. It's possible we might identify some avenues for improvements to the code design or the implementation, although typically that might be more suitable for a mini project. And it can also be useful as input for an eCSE proposal or for a computing time application that you wish to make for ARCHER2. Another new service is the virtual consultancy sessions. So this is a phone or video call discussion with someone in the core CSE team, and this is to review a particular usage of the service. So for example, it could be if someone has an idea for a new project or campaign that they wish to run on ARCHER2, but they're not sure of the steps involved in securing access or getting their software set up correctly, we can help them to go through the pathway that they're likely to follow to do that. if there's a new community or a new group of users who are interested to explore the opportunities to use ARCHER2, again, we can talk them through some of the easy options there are for them to get access to the system, to learn about the system, and to begin to make use of it. And also within the eCSE scheme, which I'm going to talk in detail about later, there are opportunities for you to talk about or to have a consultancy about the particular step you're at. If you've got an in progress eCSE, it may be you want to discuss some elements that are, not running according to plan and you need support with. If you're coming towards the end of the project, you might want to talk about how to wrap up the project most effectively. These are all examples of virtual consultancies, and again, is something we plan to offer to people. So if I look specifically at the eCSE program, the Embedded Support program, again, those of you who have been ARCHER users probably are aware of the eCSE. So the scheme funds dedicated staff effort embedded within the research community, so within your research groups, aimed to develop the software base, the UK software base, and to enhance the software that's available on ARCHER2 for UK science. We've run the eCSE scheme throughout ARCHER, and we've adopted some core values to make that as effective a scheme as possible. We aim to be as open as we can be. We aim to run it independently, so evaluations of applications, for example, are done by an independent panel. We're transparent about how it works, and we run it as a not-for-profit scheme. So in particular, funding is allocated through a peer-reviewed program, and there are opportunities to engage with that program if you wish. We will run a regular series of calls. The aim is to have 3 calls per year, and in fact, the first call is coming up quite soon, as I'll mention on the next slide. And the scheme offers typically funding along the EPCC standard 80% FEC rate or equivalent. So this is the costing scheme that you use when you apply for UKRI funding for your research staff. It's the same scheme that we'll use here to support the eCSE. As I say, we're planning to run the scheme with regular calls throughout the program, and we're guaranteeing on average 12 FTEs of funding to the community per year. It is a not-for-profit scheme. There's a budget set aside, which is based on an estimate of 12 FTEs. If it turns out that the costs are lower than anticipated and there's residual funding, we'll reinvest that into the scheme to fund more FTEs of effort for the community. The first call opens imminently on the 19th of May, which I think is Tuesday, if I remember rightly, and will close on the 7th of July. It's very similar to what we did in ARCHER. There are a couple of things worth noting. First of all, the technical evaluation that you need to submit as part of your application, that has to be submitted by the 16th of June. So the deadline for the technical evaluation coming in is ahead of the deadline for the call closing. This is to give us plenty of time to evaluate your application and to give you feedback and help to finalize your submission. We are running a virtual tutorial. I believe it's in the slot, the 3 o'clock slot, in 2 weeks' time on the 27th of May, and details are, or at least very soon will be, on the ARCHER2 website, so you can book onto that session via the ARCHER2 website. In addition to the standard eCSE scheme that we've run before, we're also running what's called a lightweight eCSE scheme. And this is again an attempt to fill in what we perceive as a gap in our spectrum of support, offering smaller eCSE projects which will fund effort of up to 3 months for a particular project. The idea is that although a number of people have benefited from the full eCSE scheme, sometimes people don't need the kind of effort levels that are offered through the eCSE scheme, but if they want, say, 3 months of effort, they have to go through the full process. We're going to run a lighter weight process for this. This is the key difference between the lightweight scheme and the full scheme. Again, staff would be embedded within the research group, and we're hoping that the lightweight scheme will start from the second call. At the moment, we're finalizing the application process, and we're working with the assessment panel to understand what information we need in that application process and what information we don't need, so that we can streamline it as much as possible. This is a another internal diagram from the processes. Here I'm looking at the life cycle of the eCSE, and the aim is to show you here that we're trying to be engaged and supportive throughout the life cycle of the scheme. So from the point when you have an idea, there's an opportunity to ask for a virtual consultancy to talk about whether that idea is something that can be formed into an eCSE proposal. We can offer things like an application health check to help you understand what it is about your application that's the sort of priority for working on an eCSE. We run virtual tutorials. As I said, there's one 2 weeks, and as the scheme gets up and running, we're planning to run workshops which will be an extension of the virtual tutorial, but potentially more interactive, where groups may actually come with draft proposals or early proposal ideas that they want to talk about specifically. Once applications have been submitted and reviewed, you can then talk about the outcome of your application. Hopefully it's successful. Sadly, it's not always successful. In successful cases, we can maybe help you to refactor that application for a future round if that's what you wish. And if it is successful, we can help you to set up the project and get started on the right footing. All successful projects get a contact in the eCSE team, who's a dedicated person that you can turn to at any point for help and support with your project. And as those of you who've submit eCSE proposals in the past will be aware, we work with you to set up a training plan as part of the proposal prep. You have access to all of the ARCHER2 training courses. You can also use third-party training where there's something you need that we don't provide, although be aware that the eCSE can't fund third-party training, so that would have to be sustained through some other route. And there's also agreement support. This is normally set up by an agreement with us around the funding, and we've tried to streamline that for ARCHER2 to make it somewhat more simplified. As the project runs, we will aim to keep in touch with you on regular intervals, provide technical support as your project progresses, and work with you towards what we hope will be a successful conclusion. As you approach the end of the project, it's key that you start to think about that final report and also about the benefits and the impacts that project has had and whether you've realized the ambitions that you had. Impact and benefit realization are a very important part of the ARCHER2 service and something close to UKRI's heart in terms of things they want to see. So it's important that we do work together to properly realize and understand the impacts and those benefits. Once the project's finished, that's not the end of your interaction with ARCHER2, I hope. Usually teams go on to then use the service for their research with their improved code or their enhanced workflows, and we will continue to support through that. We also typically publish the outputs of the eCSE program on the website, and sometimes that generates further interactions and people get in touch with us who are interested in the work and want to know more. User feedback is a key part of the ARCHER2 service and a key part of ITIL, and it's all around something called continual service improvement. If you've experienced ITIL yourself, you'll already know about continual service improvement. And the key is to constantly and throughout the service assess how well we're doing, identify where things aren't as good as they should be, and identify where things are working well, and to focus on the things that are working well and to correct the things that are working less well. So you'll see as you work with us on ARCHER2, there will be many opportunities for feedback. I appreciate sometimes it can be quite wearing to be asked how you think a query went or whether you think a particular page of documentation is useful. But I do ask you to try and take a little bit of time to give us feedback. And in return, we commit to taking that feedback and trying to incorporate it to improve our service going forwards. So I think that's pretty well all I have to say today about our spectrum of support. As I say, we're aiming to provide a suite of different support mechanisms. We don't expect everybody to use everything, but we aim to provide something for everyone so that however you feel most appropriate for you to engage with ARCHER2, you can find that route. If you just need to submit a short query, then we aim to make that as easy and seamless a process as possible. And if you have more ambitious plans around HPC software development, we aim to support that too. And we don't want to have any gaps in our service. Some of the new highlights, which you might want to look back through this talk and look at the slides, we have the callback mechanism, which means you can talk to one of our team directly about the query you're thinking of raising or you want to raise, and pin down some of the details. We're going to run a scheme of technical mini projects, which offer small amounts of effort up to a month of CSE support time, working with you on a particular problem. Code health checks to help you understand how ready your applications are to run an ARCHER2 and where there's opportunities to improve them. Lightweight eCSEs, which are a lower overhead route to securing effort within your research group to work on HPC software development, up to 3 months of effort, and with a more streamlined application process than the full eCSE scheme, which continues on from last time. And virtual consultancies, your opportunity to engage an expert from the ARCHER2 team to focus on a particular element of your use of the service, often in response to something like an eCSE proposal, but also to engage new communities or to brainstorm new ideas or to test out some thinking you have around the ARCHER2 service. The key is we want to be flexible, we want to be open, and we want to be responsive. And hopefully you'll agree that's how this is going to work out. So at this point, I'll try again to use this technology and see if I can check the questions list. Or as I say, you can unmute and ask me a question directly and I'll try my best to answer it. For eCSE proposals, do we support the AMD GPUs porting? So my understanding is that there will be AMD GPUs on the ARCHER2 service, and we will be looking for how best to exploit them as part of people's research. I'm looking if any of my technically minded colleagues are on board to discuss more when we're likely to see the AMD GPUs. I don't see anybody immediately. We can probably find more information out about that for you. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for joining this afternoon. Hopefully it was interesting. I appreciate that a talk about HPC support is not necessarily the most riveting thing in the world, but hopefully it gives you an insight in what we're hoping for ARCHER2, and hopefully it's persuaded you to apply for your accounts and come and join us and do some HPC on a very large machine when it's up and running. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a good afternoon.